So this talk is called "Can Robots Be Jewish?" And it's a look at various kind of traditional Jewish sources about how non-humanoid life can become, could it be Jewish, and could it therefore serve in Jewish ritual life? Most notably, the idea of counting a robot for a minyan, the traditional quorum of 10 people needed for prayer. So can you include a robot into that? And that's kind of the basis of if a robot can be Jewish or not. Now, the foundation for all this is a medrash, a teaching from the rabbis not recorded in the Talmud, that says even if all mankind were to gather, they would not be able to create even the wing of a gnat and animate it. Meaning that ultimately speaking, and this is you're going to see it as a thread throughout, that even if we can create life that approximates human life or living life, it will never have the key element that separates life from everything else, and that is a truly animating soul, a vivifying soul that is considered in Kabbalistic texts and other things to be a spark of godliness within. And therefore, no matter what we do, that is something that the rabbis considered that only God could do, is to truly be able to create and grant that soul. That said, we have the ability to create artificial intelligence today, and as well historically there was the golem. The golem is most famous for the golem of Prague. It's a story told about Prague during the 1600s, about the Maharal, who was a very, very famous rabbi, whose fame is really above and beyond the story about the golem. He was a foundational Jewish leader, a mystic, helped guide the Jewish people during a particularly difficult time in Central Europe and the transition to Eastern Europe. But there's this story about him creating this golem, this animated humanoid that patrolled the streets of Prague and went around and stopped anti-Semites where they're on the spot, took them, grabbed them, and stopped the blood libels, which was a real issue at that time. I think the Maharal himself led the Jews in and out of Prague, I think twice, maybe more, because Jews were banned and then allowed back in to the city again. But the Talmud is our source for the discussion of all things golem originally. So the Talmud says Rava was one of the major sages, created a man, a golem, using forces of sanctity, using divine names, so to speak. Rava sent his creation before Rabbi Zera, who was a colleague of his. Rabbi Zera would speak to him, to the golem, but did not reply. He did not reply. The golem was mute. Rabbi Zera said to him, "You were created by one of the members of the group, one of the other sages. Return to your dust," and thus the golem disintegrated and returned to the dust. And this is a story which there's a lot of discussion about, both Kabbalistic point of view as other things. And really this golem entity is what we're going to try and figure out. If a golem could be Jewish, then a robot could be Jewish as well. So if we skip forward to further around the Renaissance time as well, a little bit later, the Age of Enlightenment, there was a rabbi called the Chacham Tzvi. He was a very famous rabbi. He was an Ashkenazi. He lived in Sephardic communities, and so he records a personal history that happened with his family and asks a question about it in his responsa, in his series of questions and answers. And so he asked, question: I was unsure if a golem, created like the one Rava, which was in our previous Talmudic text, made, or the one attributed to my grandfather, Rabbi Eliyahu, the Baal Shem of Chelm, could be added to the minyan. That the Chacham Tzvi came from this Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, who was a sage who lived in Chelm, which there are stories about Chelm as being the city that had many wise men who were very foolish. But in reality, it's a real city in Poland. I've actually been there myself. There was a prominent Jewish community there. There were great scholars there who were not fools. And so Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem was purported to have created this golem, and this was something that was passed down in the Chacham Tzvi's family history. And he wanted to know, can it be added? Could it be added to a minyan? Right? Essentially, can a golem be Jewish? So, do we say that since the Torah specifies only Jewish people for the purpose of creating a minyan, it can't be counted? Or do we say, if it was created by a holy rabbi, right? You're talking not about some shmo like me or whatever. You're talking about a truly holy person who has mastered both, the works of the Talmud and Jewish law and Kabbalistic texts and things like that. That since this golem was created by a holy rabbi, It's as if it was raised by him and considered his child and thus can be counted. And this is his question. Can we count a golem or not as a Jew? So his answer, the answer seems to me, since Reb Zera destroyed the golem, then obviously it had no greater purpose, right? The sages in Judaism in general doesn't look positively on this idea of just destroying things for no reason. This is actually a prohibition, bal tashchit, of needlessly destroying something. So even though there's no issue of murder by destroying it, for murder is only when a person, born of a person, is killed, and the golem surely was not born, was created, and therefore there's no issue of prohibition of the Ten Commandments prohibition of murder. If the golem could have taken part in a minyan, surely Reb Zera would have kept it for that purpose. Meaning, if the golem had any use for in a spiritual sense, life is sacred, and therefore a person living is a sacred thing, and obviously we're prohibited from killing. But if this golem could have done something else besides just being a schlepper, but could have actually, even just included in a minyan, then he wouldn't have destroyed it. He would have kept it in his closet, and whenever he has to daven, mincha at afternoon prayer, he would have called, 8 of his friends and unlocked the golem, and there he would have had a minyan. He would have had 10 men to pray with. So obviously, the fact that he destroyed the golem, the Chacham Tzvi says, this is proof that it could not have been counted in a minyan, and therefore it's not considered to be Jewish because it doesn't have a soul given by God. It's something that was created but lacks that soul, and therefore is not Jewish. And therefore, from the Chacham Tzvi, would say that if somebody you created a robot, that robot would not be Jewish either. Now, the Chacham Tzvi had a son called the Yavitz. He was a rabbi in Germany, and he famously was involved in a number of various major disputes and conversations in the era. Definitely a leading figure. So the Yavitz writes, pertaining to my father, the Chacham Tzvi's question about counting a golem in a minyan. I don't understand his question. It was to the point. He didn't have to worry about keeping with his father's legacy per se in that sense. Surely a golem is no different than a deaf-mute person. Now this is, it should be noted in Jewish law, it speaks about who's obligated to perform mitzvahs and who is not. And the sages considered someone who is both deaf and mute to be so disconnected from the going-ons of the world. They cannot speak and they cannot hear, and therefore historically were so unable to communicate that they're in a world unto themselves and therefore are exempt. They're not obligated to do anything. That doesn't mean they aren't people. They're people. They have to be loved and treated with respect and encouraged to do what they can. And especially today, thank God, we have the ability and the understanding to be able to help people in this particular situation, to be able to accomplish amazing things with their lives. But from a technical point of view, the sages considered someone who was both deaf and mute simultaneously from birth to be someone who is exempt from mitzvahs. They're encouraged to do things, but they don't have to, and therefore we don't obligate them. And since we can't obligate them to do a mitzvah, they can't perform mitzvahs on our behalf as well. This is a general rule in Judaism, that you could perform a mitzvah that for someone else and help someone else if you are bound in it as well. So if you're a deaf mute who is exempt from minyan, doesn't have to pray with a quorum of 10, would then be exempt. So, saying again, surely a golem is no different than a deaf mute person who is a Jew in all matters and whose life is protected. You can't, God forbid, kill such a person. It is exempt from performing mitzvahs, and thus cannot join a minyan. It seems obvious that this golem, which could not speak, should have been unable to join a minyan. So you might say, one second, the golem could speak, but maybe it heard, maybe it could listen, and therefore it would just be a person, it could be considered a person that is only mute and not a deaf mute, doesn't have this dual disability or dual limitation, and therefore would be bound to mitzvahs. So he says, yes, in the story of Reb Zera, he gave the golem instructions, but if Reb Zera could gift his creation with speech or hearing, surely he would have both. If Rava had the ability to gift this golem with both speech and hearing, he would have. The fact that he didn't give it speech means that he was unable to give it speech. And if he was unable to give it speech, it stands to reason the Yavitz felt that he was unable to give it a hearing as well. And so surely he wasn't able to do either one. Rather, the golem can either hear, could not hear or speak, and Rava used hand signals like one would train a dog. That he waved his hand, he pointed over there, and his golem picked up on the visual cues, and then went ahead and went to Reb Zera. This fits the words of Avraham Azulai, one of the Kabbalists, that writes that the soul of something created through Sefer Yetzirah. This is the book that the Talmud relates, that sages tapping into its creative. It's a book that we have today, and is a Kabbalistic text, a very early one that it's considered to be written by Abraham. That the Sefer Yetzirah, this book, is a book about how speech has the power to create, and that has application in our lives as well. When we realize the power of our speech and what our own words can do and accomplish in this world, let alone God's. But it's a look at how speech can used to be create, and so Avraham Azulai said that someone who creates a being out of this Sefer Yetzirah, whatever it creates has a soul only that of an animal. Thus, this is why, according to the Ivets, it was okay to kill this golem. This destroying the golem is no worse than slaughtering an animal. Surely then it could not join a minion because it is an animal. It has some sort of vivifying life force, but it's not a human. It does not have human capacity at all, and therefore it could not be considered a minion. So he then adds a final personal note. A note: my father told me about the golem created by my ancestor, Eliyahu Baal Shem of Chelm. After he noticed it was growing out of control, that it was growing in size or in power, or in some way he realized he could no longer control this entity that he created, he became frightened. He became frightened from it and destroyed it by erasing the name of God that was on its forehead. This deprecated the golem, but damaged the Rebbe Eliyahu Baal Shem of Chelm, in the process leaving a scar on his face. This could be read as a word of warning that those who wish to truly create something, create some other form of life in whatever form, should proceed with caution and understand the power they are unleashing into the world. So all this would come to say that any golem created could never be Jewish. Using the Ivitz's example, because it only has the soul of an animal, Kabbalistically speaking, that it wasn't born of a person, and therefore whatever it is, it lacks that ability to take part in Jewish life, and therefore a golem could not be Jewish. Which would then tell us that if we were to create some sort of robot, even with an AI that's very advanced, it cannot become Jewish because for these reasons, especially because we're speaking about something that's purely created out of physical means and doesn't have any spiritual element of a soul being given to it. But there's a possible opening that indeed, theoretically, it might be possible to create a golem, which is a sentient being, and therefore could be considered Jewish. So this is from someone called the Radziner. He was a Chassidic Rebbe in Poland, who wrote a book called Sidrei Taharot. It's a commentary on various laws of purity in the Mishnah and the part of the Talmud, as it were. So he says, it's surprising to me that the Chacham Tzvi would claim there's no issue in destroying a golem. How could it be okay to kill this golem, if the golem has a life force and appearance of a person, right? Even though this golem, this thing walking around, this automaton, this humanoid that's going about, is not a person. It looks like a person. It can walk. It can make noises. It has so much to it that seems human. It doesn't make sense. There's no precedent to say such a thing. By his logic, it would have been permissible to kill Adam. Why? Because what's the Chacham Tzvi's argument? Is that only something born from another person is truly a person. But something that was created wholesale, brand new, would be okay to kill. So by that logic, it would be okay to kill Adam, was created by God, something completely unsupported in any texts. What's more, we see that what happened. Reb Zera said something, and this golem returned to the earth. How did Reb Zera know the golem sent by Rav wasn't indeed a deaf mute person? How was he able to tell that this golem wasn't a human? If it looked human. So rather, the ability to truly create, he answers, can only come from someone exceptionally holy, without any spiritual imperfection. He actually references, there's a teaching in the Talmud that there are 4 people who died from what's called the bite of the snake, from the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge. And this means, the Talmud explains, these are people who had perfected them so much that there was nothing wrong with them whatsoever, and the only reason that they passed away in this world was because of the small amount of imperfection which is kind of hard-coded into all of reality from that moment and onward. So someone like that, someone who reached that level, the Radziner says, could be able to create life that has the ability to speak. But as great as Rava was, he was not at that level, and thus his golem was incomplete and recognizable to Reb Zera, that he could look at it and see there was something missing from this. There was something about this golem that's speaking to me, that's walking up to me, that it's not just a person who's unable to speak, it really is a golem. There's something about it. It wasn't that it merely lacked the ability to speak, like a mute person who has the faculties to speak, but is unable to for various reasons. Or they lack the foundational soul ability to speak. It's not quite clear what he means, Radziner means here, but I looking at it, I tried to understand it as an expression of sentience and free will. There was something about the way it communicated, brought and acted, that you could tell that it lacked the ability to speak. In the various commentaries speak about how speech is connected to sentience, to our free will and our ability to make ethical calls and things like that. And therefore, because it lacked this faculty of speech, it wasn't that it couldn't speak, but there was something lacking, and recognizably lacking from this golem that made it entirely unable to speak. But theoretically, all this is to say, according to the Radziner, that if someone was truly at this, astounding level, it would be able to, he would be able to, or she would be able to create this golem that could speak and could have sentience and could act on its own. And therefore, theoretically speaking, if you could create such a golem and it could speak, according to Radziner, it would be Jewish. And then maybe it's possible that if you have a set of truly holy programmers and coders and developers working together, maybe they could create a golem, create a robot that has free will by means of whatever spiritual/physical technology they develop. But all that is to say, it seems very unlikely, according to most texts, that someone could create a golem that is Jewish, and therefore to create a robot that is Jewish as well, since obviously there for sure would be lacking a soul, it would not be considered human and not be considered Jewish as well. So a life lesson from this. This is something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about in 1975, about lessons we could learn from a computer. And I think there's some relevance to this, both with the amount of time we spend on computers in general, but also with creating robots. So the programmers who coded the computer made it for only specific uses, right? The original, adding machines, early computers were created for specific tasks. It we see today that computers are used in many unintended fields. If the computer can use its processing power for untold uses by applying its source code to whatever new case that may arise, that by the computer looking into the code that it has within it could then be used and pushed to all kinds of amazing things. And that we, as human beings with free will, can look at this computer or look at the potential it has and be able to use it to apply it to amazing things. And that, in fact, the Rebbe actually added, it's not here, I didn't write this part here, but that, just like somebody who says, I want to use a pen and pencil, a pen and paper, or a pencil and paper to do work, and not use a computer. That person is missing the point because they're limiting their ability to be able to accomplish so much good by applying the computer to its fullest potential. So too, there's a lesson for us. We Jews have the ability to adapt to the changes of the world, looking at our source code, the Torah. If we look at the Torah as the source code for life in the world around us, all these things, then if we look to that code, we can then tap into it and be able to use it and apply it to our lives and be able to create amazing things in the world with that free will, with the uniquely human ability that we possess, to be able to think and expound and be able to truly do great things in this world. So I don't know if it's relatively a short talk, but I think we have time for some question and answers if anyone is interested, and so we could talk a little bit from there if anyone has any questions, and then move on.